The moon ceremony was the most important night of the year for the Blackthorn Pack. Every wolf, young and old, gathered beneath the full moon to watch the ancient magic of fate reveal itself. It was the night when mating bonds appeared, connecting two souls who were meant to stand together for life. Lyra Ashworth had waited for this night since she was a child, listening to stories of glowing silver threads that joined hearts forever. She never imagined that when her moment finally came, it would break her instead of completing her. Lyra stood at the back of the crowd, as she always did. She was an Omega, the lowest rank among the wolves, and Omegas were taught early to stay quiet, stay small, and never draw attention. She was gentle by nature, more comfortable with herbs and healing than with the roaring energy of pack hierarchy. Her silver eyes and calm presence made her different from the fierce alphas and betas around her, but different was not always seen as valuable in Blackthorn territory. When the ceremony began, the air turned electric. One by one, wolves stepped forward as the moonlight touched their skin, revealing threads of light connecting them to their fated mates. Cheers and tears filled the clearing. Then it was Lyra's turn. She stepped into the moonlight, nervous but hopeful, and gasped as a shimmering silver thread burst from her chest and stretched across the clearing, connecting her to the one wolf no one expected. Kale Draven, the Alpha King. He was the most powerful wolf in the territory, known for his cold authority and unmatched strength. Wolves feared him. Wolves respected him. But no one, especially not Kale himself, expected to be bound to an Omega. The clearing fell silent. Every eye turned to Kale, waiting for his reaction. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and for a long, painful moment, he said nothing. Lyra's heart pounded with a strange mixture of hope and fear. Then Kale spoke, his voice loud enough for the entire pack to hear. "I reject this bond." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. A mating rejection was rare, and it was cruel. The moment the words left his mouth, pain tore through Lyra's chest, sharp and burning, as if something inside her had been ripped away. She staggered, gasping, but forced herself to remain standing, refusing to collapse in front of the pack that already looked down on her. Kale did not apologize. He did not offer comfort. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Lyra standing alone in the moonlight, humiliated in front of everyone she had ever known. The days that followed were the hardest of her life. Word of the rejection spread quickly, and with it came whispers and mocking glances. Some wolves pitied her. Others laughed behind her back, saying an Omega had no business being fated to an Alpha King in the first place. Lyra stopped attending pack gatherings. She stopped speaking unless necessary. She poured herself into her work as an assistant to the pack healer, an elderly wolf named Mabel, who had taken her in years ago and taught her everything she knew about herbs, poisons, and the delicate art of healing. Mabel was one of the few who treated Lyra with kindness during this time. She never asked Lyra to explain her pain. She simply kept her busy, teaching her new remedies, testing her knowledge of rare plants, and reminding her, in her quiet way, that worth was not something a king could take away with a single sentence. Months passed. Lyra built a small, steady life for herself on the outskirts of Blackthorn territory, far from the central lodge where Kale ruled. She rarely thought about him, or at least she told herself she didn't. The bond between them, though rejected, left a strange echo in her chest, a dull ache that never fully disappeared. She learned to live with it the way one learns to live with an old scar. Kale, meanwhile, continued his duties as Alpha King, seemingly unaffected by what he had done. He led his warriors, negotiated with neighboring packs, and maintained the strength of Blackthorn territory with the same coldness he always had. If he ever thought about the Omega he had rejected, he never showed it. His advisors whispered that rejecting a mate could sometimes have consequences, quiet ones that crept up slowly. But Kale dismissed such warnings. He believed he had made the right choice. An Alpha King needed a mate who could stand beside him in strength, not an Omega who belonged in the healing tents. He did not yet know how wrong he was. Trouble began quietly, the way real danger often does. A neighboring group known as the Nightshade Coalition had long resented Blackthorn's power. They were cunning, patient, and skilled in matters that most wolves avoided, including the use of rare poisons that could not be detected by ordinary means. When Blackthorn announced a summit meeting to renew an alliance with two other territories, the Nightshade Coalition saw their opportunity. They could not defeat Kale in open combat. His strength was legendary, and his warriors were loyal to the death. So instead, they turned to a slower, quieter method. Through a bribed servant within the lodge, a rare toxin was introduced into Kale's food over several weeks, in doses too small to cause immediate harm, but large enough to build steadily in his body. The poison was designed to weaken him gradually, its symptoms mimicking simple exhaustion or stress, until the night of the summit, when it would strike all at once. The plan worked exactly as intended. On the night of the summit, with leaders from 3 territories gathered in the Great Hall of Blackthorn Lodge, Kale rose to give his opening address. Midway through his speech, his voice faltered. His hand gripped the edge of the table. Sweat broke across his forehead despite the cool evening air. Then, without warning, he collapsed. Chaos erupted in the hall. Guards rushed forward. Visiting leaders backed away in alarm. Kale's personal healers were summoned immediately, but as they examined him, panic set in. His pulse was erratic, his breathing shallow, and his skin had taken on a pale, grayish tone. None of the standard remedies had any effect. The healers exchanged fearful glances, unable to identify what was wrong, let alone how to fix it. Word spread through the lodge like wildfire. The Alpha King was dying, and no one knew why. Far on the outskirts of the territory, Lyra heard the news from a frightened messenger sent to gather any healer who might help. At first, she felt nothing but a distant unease, the kind one might feel hearing about a stranger's misfortune. But as the messenger described the symptoms in more detail, pale skin, erratic pulse, sudden collapse after weeks of unexplained fatigue, something clicked in Lyra's mind. She had read about a toxin exactly like this in one of Mabel's oldest healing texts, a poison so rare that most modern healers had never encountered it. Without thinking twice about the wolf who had rejected her, Lyra grabbed her satchel of herbs and ran toward the central lodge. When she arrived, the great hall was in disarray. Guards blocked the entrance to Kale's chambers, refusing to let anyone through except approved healers. Lyra, breathless and still dressed in her simple work clothes, tried to explain that she recognized the poison, but the guards looked at her with open scorn. "An Omega healer's assistant thinks she can help the king?" One guard sneered. "Turn back before you embarrass yourself further." Lyra's chest tightened with old humiliation, the same helpless feeling from the night of her rejection, but this time, she refused to let it silence her. She thought of every symptom the messenger described, every detail matching the rare poison from Mabel's texts, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was right. "If you do not let me through," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "your king will die tonight, and it will be because of your pride, not mine." Something in her tone, calm yet unshakable, made one of the senior guards hesitate. He had served long enough to recognize true conviction when he heard it. Against the protests of the others, he allowed her through. Inside Kale's chambers, the scene was worse than Lyra imagined. The Alpha King lay pale and trembling on his bed, surrounded by healers who had run out of ideas. Mabel, who had also been summoned, looked up in relief when she saw Lyra enter. "Tell me what you see," Mabel said quickly, trusting her student without hesitation. Lyra examined Kale's symptoms with focused precision, ignoring the skeptical stares of the other healers. The grayish tint to his skin, the specific pattern of his pulse, the faint bitter smell on his breath, all confirmed what she suspected. It was wraithroot poisoning, a toxin so rare that its antidote required an exact combination of 3 specific herbs, prepared in a precise order, within a narrow window of time. "I need silverleaf, bittermoss, and crimson thorn root," Lyra said firmly, "and I need them now." The other healers hesitated, unfamiliar with such an obscure remedy, but Mabel nodded immediately, sending assistants scrambling to retrieve the ingredients from the healing stores. While they waited, Lyra knelt beside Kale's bed, checking his pulse again, watching his labored breathing with growing urgency. This was the wolf who had rejected her in front of the entire pack, who had walked away without a single word of comfort. Yet in this moment, none of that mattered. All she saw was a dying wolf who needed help, and she was the only one capable of giving it to him. When the herbs arrived, Lyra worked with steady hands, grinding and mixing the precise ratios she had memorized from Mabel's teachings. The process could not be rushed. Each step required patience, and one mistake could turn the antidote into a more potent poison. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked through the night, ignoring her own exhaustion, focused entirely on saving the life in front of her. Around midnight, she finally administered the remedy, carefully guiding the mixture past Cale's lips. Then came the hardest part, waiting. Hours passed in tense silence. Mabel stayed by Lyra's side, offering quiet reassurance, while the other healers watched from a distance, unsure of what to expect. Lyra did not leave Cale's bedside once. She monitored his breathing, checked his pulse every few minutes, and prepared a second, weaker dose, in case the first proved insufficient. Just before dawn, Cale's breathing steadied. The grayish tone in his skin began to fade, replaced slowly by natural color. His pulse, once erratic and weak, grew stronger and more even. By the time the first light of morning touched the chamber windows, the Alpha King's fever had broken completely. He opened his eyes. The first face he saw was Lyra's, exhausted but relieved, her hands still trembling slightly from hours of careful work. For a long moment, Cale simply stared at her, confusion evident in his gaze, as he tried to piece together what had happened. "You," he said, his voice hoarse. "You saved me." Lyra did not answer right away. She simply nodded, too tired to find the right words, and finally allowed herself to sit back in the chair beside his bed, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. News of what happened spread quickly through the lodge. The Omega Healer's assistant, the very wolf Cale had rejected in front of the entire pack, had saved his life when none of his trained healers could. Whispers of admiration replaced the old whispers of mockery. Even the guards who had once scorned her now looked at her with newfound respect. In the days that followed, as Cale recovered his strength, he found himself unable to stop thinking about what Lyra had done. She owed him nothing. He had humiliated her, discarded her, and yet she had run toward danger to save him without hesitation. The realization settled over him slowly, then, all at once, filling him with a shame he had never allowed himself to feel before. He sought her out one quiet afternoon, finding her in the small healing hut on the outskirts of the territory where she had built her simple life. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded but calm. "I came to thank you," Cale said, his voice lacking its usual commanding edge, "and to apologize. What I did to you that night was wrong. I judged you before I ever truly saw you, and I have regretted it more than I can express." Lyra listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction at hearing the powerful Alpha King admit his mistake. But mostly, she just felt tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying pain for too long. "I appreciate your apology," she said finally. "But an apology cannot undo what was done. The bond you rejected is gone, Cale. It cannot simply be restored because you regret your choice now." Cale's expression tightened, not with anger, but with the quiet grief of realizing a truth too late. He had spent months believing an Omega was beneath him, only to discover that the wolf he had discarded possessed more strength, knowledge, and courage than he had ever given her credit for. Now, faced with the consequences of his own pride, he understood that some mistakes could not be fixed with words alone. "I understand," he said quietly. "I only hope you know how truly grateful I am, and how deeply sorry." Lyra offered him a small, tired smile, free of bitterness, but also free of longing. "I forgive you, Cale, but forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I have built a life here, a life that does not depend on your acceptance to feel whole. I hope you find peace with what happened, just as I have." Cale left her hut that day with a heavy heart, understanding at last the weight of the choice he had made in a single careless moment. He returned to his duties as Alpha King, ruling with newfound humility, forever changed by the experience. He never rejected another soul so carelessly again, and he never forgot the Omega, whose quiet strength had saved his life, when his own pride nearly ended it. Lyra, meanwhile, continued her work as a healer, eventually establishing her own small sanctuary in neutral territory, free from pack politics and old wounds. She found purpose in helping others, building a reputation not as the Omega who had been rejected, but as the healer whose skill and courage had once saved an Alpha King. She carried the memory of that night with her, not as a source of pain, but as proof of her own resilience. And though the silver thread that once connected her to Chaol never returned, Lyra learned that her worth had never truly depended on it. She had saved a life not because a bond demanded it, but because it was who she was, an Omega whose quiet strength outshone the pride of kings. In the years that followed, the story of that night became legend among the Blackthorn Pack, a reminder passed down through generations that true strength often comes from the ones least expected to have it, and that some choices, once made in pride and fear, can never truly be undone, no matter how deep the regret that follows.